GameXplain is a well-established Nintendo news channel with over 1 million subscribers. Over the last decade, they've been doing very well for themselves, uploading daily and gaining a lot of support over that time. But recently, they have inexplicably stopped uploading, and for the first time ever have been losing subscribers at a rapid rate, and receiving a lot of dislikes on their last upload. So what exactly happened here? Well, it all goes back to November of last year, when majority of the GameXplain staff decided to abruptly leave the channel in order to make their own channel, Good Vibes Gaming. One of those people, Paulsen, decided to make a statement about it, and in that statement he cited one of the reasons for leaving GameXplain was to start a new venture while being treated as an equal partner. When I first saw this, I found this rather interesting because it implies he wasn't treated fairly at GameXplain, and that ended up being the case when a week ago they uploaded a podcast where one of the former GameXplain employees explained his bad experience reviewing Final Fantasy VII Remake for GameXplain. Here is what he said.
Final Fantasy VII Remake was the worst experience I had reviewing a game in 2020. And that is because, due in no small part to Square, so the review embargo for Final Fantasy VII Remake was April 6th. We got the game on April 4th. Right. And so it was originally our intention to have Derrick review it. It was just like, hey, this is definitely going to be Derrick's game. And I mean, they just didn't give us time. And I don't know if it was lunacy or what it was, but I was like, yeah, I guess I could do it. I could probably beat the game in that amount of time. And I did not sleep. I powered through this whole game in 2 days, basically. And I mean, I don't think I've ever suffered more to make a video than I did for this game. I mean, I sent Derrick my draft of the review. I was delirious.
I needed to basically rewrite the whole thing.
Yeah, it was, I mean, I had a jumble of thoughts, but I mean, I literally, thinking back on it right now, I can feel my eyes burning. Like, just the incredible pain I was in to just get it done. And I remember, like, my wife, God bless her, she was like, I love you. I'm glad this is over. Go take a shower and leave GameXplain as soon as you can. Like, I will be the first to admit that this is where she just turned on GameXplain. She was like, you need to get out of there. She's like, never do this again. And I was like, yeah, this is not defensible. I was like, I should not have done this.
And hey, I said all my stuff I was going through. And the thing was, I was loving every minute of playing Final Fantasy VII Remake. By the time you were doing your review, I think I was at Walmart doing that stuff. So I was roughly halfway through. So definitely not enough time to finish it all up. But I was the one to do all the guide stuff for GameXplain on Final Fantasy VII Remake. And there's a lot of guide stuff between all the hand massages, getting all the damn dresses. Because that was repetitious as hell doing that one. Just whatever other guides we did. I think all the weapon locations, just all of it. And I am so glad to not have to do guide work anymore for games, because it's a testament to how much I love this game, because guide work usually kills my enjoyment of a game. Just kills any kind of excitement I had for it. To do repetitious things and just focus on that so much. And I loved it so much. I played Final Fantasy VII Remake again on stream on hard mode and just loved it to death again. Like Ash said, game of the year easily. I
felt so bad for you guys though, because that is especially for you, Steve. I would never have wanted to experience that game in such a way. And, and of course that was not, I was still doing plenty of work for GameXplain by that point, but I had certainly by that point, my wife had kind of turned on GameXplain long before this for similar reasons in terms of the work being put into it versus what I was getting out of it. And nothing quite so. Well, I did have one really. What was it? There was a game that I reviewed that I had to beat it in like 2 days or 3 days, and it was pretty rough. But I would not have wanted to experience FF7 Remake like that, and that also is testament to just the game's quality, that you were still able to love it and appreciate it the way you did.
After this video was posted, it ended up getting spread around. One of the primary places it first emerged was on the GameXplain subreddit, basically just going over everything I just went over, and this caused the owner of GameXplain, André, Segers, to remove the post and private the subreddit. Luckily, the subreddit wasn't created by him, and the mod who had power over him and created the subreddit was able to reverse these things and remove him as moderator. Since then, the story has kind of erupted, and the former GameXplain staff as well as people associated with them ended up making statements and comments about this over the last couple days. The first person to come out was Steve's wife, who responded to a critical Reddit comment by saying, "Lol, I'm manipulated by their women, like we are property." I'll say this, if Steve was treated like a person instead of a machine and paid fairly for the amount of work he was expected to put out, I would have fully supported him staying at GameXplain. However, for what he worked out to be around $1 to $2 an hour between playing through games, writing and producing videos, maintaining and growing relationships with developers, working to get code for games, etc., I would have been a terrible partner not to encourage him to find a way to continue doing what he loves in a healthy way. As far as him being work-phobic, he also maintains and has since before GameXplain a corporate 9-to-5 career, while also helping to raise 4 children. Trust me, he's extremely hardworking. Steve then makes a statement of his own. In it he says, "Alright y'all, I've been trying to keep my distance from this, but I see a lot of questions that I feel deserve some context. And I don't want to remain silent when I feel the community deserves answers. Everything I'm going to say is rooted in fact. I won't be offering my opinions of GameXplain or of André, just things I know to be true because they happened to me. I joined GameXplain in December 2018. André started paying me for my work in September 2019. He discussed a fee of $550. I had no idea if my videos were even worth the amount I had asked for, and I didn't know what anybody else at the channel was paid at the time. That $550 was a flat fee per month, not per video, and without any additional performance-based incentives. That means if I did a couple of news updates or discussions, I got $550. Conversely, it also means if I was reviewing Last of Us 2, while playing through Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door and participating in Game Club, I still just got $550. Every month I also maintained GameXplain's email server and worked with publishers and developers to secure review copies for the entire team. If I brought in a sponsorship deal, meaning I negotiated the deal, wrote, recorded, edited, and posted the video, I would receive 33% of the proceeds, with the remaining 67% going to the channel. But those were few and far between. I didn't consider what my hourly rate was until my wife showed me the math. She was right. After Derrick left, André offered me a full-time position for $50,000 annually, with 25% of sponsorships I brought in being offered. That was far lower than André was aware I was making at my full-time job at the time, and I couldn't accept it while supporting my family. I had concerns after seeing an employee contract offered to somebody else. There were negative clauses contained therein that would have brought a negative impact to my career. We are not asking people to unfollow GameXplain, and we definitely don't want to undermine the work the new staff there has done and continues to do. They deserve the same consideration and love that you've all shown us over the years, and all of us unanimously agreed that we don't want this to undermine or reflect negatively on their efforts. Regardless of your own opinion of André or GameXplain, I'd like to ask that nobody engage in harassment of any kind. That isn't what Good Vibes Gaming is about, and we don't condone that type of behavior. Period. I hope this sheds some light on my experience with GameXplain. I appreciate all the messages of support I've received over the past 24 hours. I hope I've answered your questions. And that's all I have to say about that. I love you all. I would be lost response to Steve's statement by asking why he wasn't paid for the first 9 months of his work, and if he was promised pay during that time. Steve's wife responds by saying, yes, there was a promise of pay. When it didn't come, Steve asked a couple of times and André told him, yeah, we need to sit down and figure that out, but never arranged for the sit down to happen. When Steve was in Seattle for PAX, he confronted André in person. That's when he began receiving payment for his work. He was never back paid for the 9 months prior. Another ex-GameXplain employee, John Cartwright, responds to some people criticizing Steve by saying, I won't comment much, but I feel those excusing the algorithm need to be more respectful to Steve. For more insight, GameXplain was looking to employ another full-time person before we voiced any intention of leaving. I'm not sure why Steve was making $2 an hour if there was money to pay another body. Steve's wife comments on this by saying, GameXplain was making tens of thousands of dollars every month in ad revenue alone before Steve left. Someone asks, what's your source on this? To which she responds, Steve is my husband. A freelancer for GameXplain called Brainchild commented on this by saying, now this is having me feel some type of way. I accepted the shit pay under the assumption that the channel was strapped for cash, but this is fucking unacceptable to me. The things I've held my tongue about, y'all don't even want to know. There was a time where even $2 an hour would be nice for the amount of hours I put into some of those tech analysis projects. I'm devastated by this news. I can't fucking believe it. As people were discussing the actual amount of money that the GameXplain channel must have been making, a user called LowsJam ended up doing a pretty accurate analysis. He says, so I actually went and did a bit of math here. so I decided to count the amount of views they have in a single month. I went for April because that was the whole Final Fantasy VII debacle. The team was still all there, and it was before they started to have the new crew on, so I counted the view counts of April. For the record, I started on Last of Us 2 Delayed, and ended on tons of new Xenoblade screenshots, just so people can check my math. I merely counted all the views from the videos, and man, it is staggering. There were a total of 9.2 million views. Now this gives us a great baseline, considering that YouTube/advertisers grant a certain amount per 1,000 views. Now the actual numbers can change and vary depending on ads and stuff, but the common wisdom is that a YouTube video will make around $3 to $5 per 1,000 views. Even on the low end, it doesn't look great for André. If every video made $3 per 1,000 views, that means GameXplain racked up a total of $27,000 within the month of April alone. At the high end, it means that GameXplain racked up a total of $45,000 in the month of April. And yes, advertisers change, so the answer is likely somewhere in the middle, and it stacks up with what Steve's wife was saying. And this is even before their extra sources of revenue. They have a Patreon, are brand ambassadors for Amazon, they get a cut from Amazon links in the description, and they also sell some merch. Not to mention the donations from streams and etc. Looking at this, it is absolutely disgusting that Steve wasn't paid. With this amount of monthly revenue, even on the low end, they would be able to pay each person at GameXplain at the time at least $80K a year, with a lot left over. Hell, even $40K would be pretty substantial for the part-timers like Steve and Ash. This is absolutely disgusting. Brainchild responds to Lawzan by saying, "Thanks for the kind words. It really was the community that kept me motivated to keep doing those videos. Goodness knows it wasn't the money. Unfortunately, there reached a point where I just had too much going on in my life that I really couldn't justify spending so much time on those productions. I had a marketing job, a job in CS/machine learning research, visual effects freelance work, I have 5 kids, and was in the middle of a divorce. Plus, I was suffering from mental health issues for a variety of reasons. So I decided to significantly reduce my involvement with whatever amounted to what I considered to be hobbyist work, which is what working with GameXplain was to me. Now that I know that André really could have afforded to pay me the professional standard, I'm really disappointed in myself that I settled for so little. It's quite embarrassing, honestly." Going back to Steve's post, someone blamed Steve for settling on such a low price of $550 per month, and Steve's wife responded to this by saying, "I doubt that at the time they discussed the flat fee, he was anticipating the workload requiring so much of him that he would get to the point of needing to call off work at his well-paying job just to catch up on sleep." Steve joined the team with someone he thought was a friend. Also, as someone else posted, there was a message put out by Brainchild that stated André made it seem like he couldn't afford much. Steve did not initially have access to the channel in a way that allowed him to even upload videos himself, let alone see monetization information. He did get access at a point last year, but it was restricted later so he couldn't see the monetization. If the channel's monetary success hadn't been downplayed, I'm sure he would have asked for more initially. Steve's wife then elaborated further on why Steve was restricted from seeing how much money GameXplain made when she responded to someone by saying, "I know that at one point last year, I think after Steve saw/mentioned how much the Animal Crossing review was making, steps were taken to hide the video monetization analytics from at least Steve. I can't speak for the rest of the crew." Speaking of the rest of the crew, they actually ended up speaking up in their own very lengthy statements. The first one comes from Derrick. It starts out with him saying, "Obviously I've never posted to Reset Era before this, but I wanted to get some things out there that I've bottled up for some time now. I just wanted to provide some more context if possible, but these are just some of my experiences. First, none of us knew how much each other was making. All I knew is that I was making the most of all the employees as I had been there the longest. Each year I would get a raise until it topped out at 5K per month in 2018. Despite asking for my yearly raise, André said that the channel couldn't afford it as by that point John had been brought on. I didn't mind though, as having John on the team was a lifesaver. He was able to do updates and keep an eye on the channel, lightening my daily workload significantly. I felt expected to be on call at all times and would be nervous to even leave my home most days, fearing that some random Nintendo news would come out. This didn't really go away until John joined, and Amy pushed me to take time for myself. Rarely did André handle an update, and when it was just him, he would wait until either John or myself was free again to actually handle it. Before then, it always had to be done ASAP. As for GameXplain's income, I was able to see the analytics for quite some time, and the estimation is mostly on point. though there were some months where it would dip below that estimation. But the high end always felt massive, and I hoped that the rest of the team, especially John, was being compensated for that extra income. That said, I had to handle any work expenses myself for the most part, including consoles and equipment. The only part of my current setup provided by André is my mic. I paid for my flights to LA for E3 or trains to New York for Nintendo events, while André would handle the cost of hotels if needed and meals if we were together. I never said anything as the expensive could have been used as write-offs for my taxes, and helped at the end of the year. However, this year felt different as the team started talking more. I discovered that John was making less than half of what I did despite doing the same amount of work. Steam's income has already been brought up, and Ash had stepped back from the channel for only occasional work. He would send invoices that André would eventually get to, but André always had to be reminded to send our paychecks out. We tried to get a calendar started so he could be more consistent, but he resisted the idea. One other thing to know is that despite a Discord where we all chatted and coordinated, André would often DM each of us to ask specific things. Ostensibly, it was so we could see them better, but often it felt a way to strong-arm for videos he wanted. There were many times when he wanted an update on something that I didn't feel was worth the time, as I was working on other things, but he would push until I relented. Sometimes he gave up, but it was rare. It got to a point where I would ignore or put off looking at his DMs if I was busy with something else, or be more combative over the updates he wanted to put out. André was extremely controlling, seemingly timing things to directly disrupt plans. He gave John tons of work when his YouTube channel took off, making it difficult for him to make videos there. He also asked me to stop streaming to YouTube, as he didn't like old game playthroughs mixed in with our current event style. As a side note, any money I earned from Super Chat had been totaled to me and invoiced at the end of the year as a bonus, so leaving to Twitch served as a chance to earn money more immediately. Especially with the baby on the way and Amy unable to work on her own projects due to the effects of COVID, I prepared people for the move for a while as I completed the final playthrough. But on the day of the final stream, André contacted me and asked that I stream to GameXplain's Twitch instead. His reason was that he wouldn't be able to make me properly full-time if I streamed on my own Twitch, something I have been building toward through most of the year. If I streamed to my own Twitch, I would be considered a freelancer and immediately have my pay removed, with the rates estimated at $15 to $20 per update, and $100 to $150 per feature or review. He said I could have full control of the GameXplain Twitch though, so I felt strong-armed into taking the deal. I still got the money from subs and bits monthly, but I had to go through him. It also felt like he dragged his feet to confirm affiliate status, because he thought me streaming would somehow turn people away from the new Game Club tier on Patreon. Around September, he asked me to join a voice call, where he wanted to discuss me at GameXplain going forward. I popped in at the appointed time and he asked to be on camera. It turns out he prepared a PowerPoint where he ran down several things. How COVID had affected ad rates and lowered income, how he was still paying me the same despite this, how I was fighting him when updates had to be done, and ultimately, how I was bringing in less money for the channel than what I was being paid. It ended with a question of whether I was still loyal and still wanted an official full-time position. Again, with a baby on the way, I was scared to the point of meekness because I felt I couldn't put Amy and the baby in that position. When André finally presented me with the full-time contract, I was in the middle of a nightmare moving situation where I could barely focus on anything. He pushed the fact that I had to make a decision as soon as possible due to timing, but I could not change my income situation without messing up my loan application. Ultimately, he gave me the time I needed, and I talked to the loan officers as my boss to help me get my loan. But in the intervening time, I was able to take a close look at the contract. There was no defined set hours, no increase in pay, no overtime, no health coverage, not enough full-time employees, and overtime would only translate to extra time off, not extra pay. In addition, he wanted me to approve where I appeared and when I streamed, taking away the one bit of control I had with the Twitch. It felt like I had no say in my life. Everything had to go through him if I wanted to earn money beyond GameXplain. But worst of all was the NDA included in the contract. Tucked in the many points listed was a non-compete clause. Basically, if I signed the contract and left or was fired from GameXplain for any reason, I would not be able to work in the same space for a year. I took this means no YouTube, no games media, nothing. I talked to a lot of people around this time trying to figure out what to do. After speaking with all of them, including Amy, Ash, Steve, John, I ultimately decided to leave with Ash and Steve coming with me so we could pursue Ash's idea of Good Vibes Gaming. It felt better to attempt my own thing rather than deal with that contract and the general stress and pressure of GameXplain. Money is tight, but I am so much happier now. I can only gratefully thank all of you who have supported Good Vibes Gaming so far, whether it be as part of our Patreon, watching my streams, or subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me that I can happily pursue my ideas and look forward to sharing them with our fans. Ultimately though, no matter what, I request that you don't harass any of the new hires, Tom or André. I merely want to provide more context and shed light on the position I was coming from. Thank you all for your support and take care. Wow, that is a heartbreaking situation to say the least. But we are not done with the statements yet, as more ex-GameXplain employees are coming out to say their piece. The first one is from a freelancer called Brandon. He says, I worked freelance for GameXplain for the majority of 2020. It started with the 10th anniversary of GameXplain video. I was elated to be asked to work with my favorite YouTube channel of all time. Unfortunately, my experience wasn't what I hoped for. I put maybe 15 to 20 hours into that video, and me being new to freelance, we settled on $150. I was so excited by the opportunity that I let the lowball slide. This set an unfortunate precedent. Later on in the year, I was offered the opportunity to edit every episode of Game Club. This was some of the most stressful work I had to do for GameXplain, and I was asked for a pittance of $65 per video. I value myself higher than this now, but I believe André could have stepped in and told me I was lowballing myself. But he didn't. With future projects, I started sending invoices with what I believed I was owed, to no contest from André. Now, most of you probably don't even know I was involved with GameXplain for as long as I was. That's because André made little to no effort to give me credit of any kind. The most blatant instance was when he asked me to edit the Super Mario 3D All-Stars review. I worked the entirety of the night up until 45 minutes before the embargo to get that video done. André's Twitter made it sound like he worked through the night when it was me. He didn't finish writing his review until that evening, putting me into a corner and allowing him to coast through that night while I worked. I was furious. At this point, I decided I was going to walk away. I was making no strides in my career because nobody knew I was doing the work. Steve thankfully would edit André's descriptions and add credits for me or tag me on Twitter himself. After completing what was supposed to be my last video, André asked me if I would work on another video. I told him I likely wouldn't have the time to do it, and his response upset me. He made it sound like it wasn't a ton of work. If it wasn't, why didn't he do it? What did he do all day? I still don't know. I accepted the work disgruntled, and that was the end of my time at GameXplain. I wanted to be done with it. During this entire experience, I was one of the candidates to be hired for GameXplain. André knowingly used this to pressure me into more work for little money. I found out I didn't get the job before deciding to leave because Steve was kind enough to let me know. I didn't hear this from André himself until mere days before the new hires were announced. And I knew for a fact it was decided I wouldn't be hired quite some time prior. I've never felt more used and taken advantage of in my life. It hurt me on a deep level and I still struggle with it. That said, I have immense respect for Tom, Trish, Chris, and Joey and wish them all the success in the world. Please don't harass or direct hate at André or anyone else at GameXplain. Thank you. Now our final statement comes from Paulsen, the person I mentioned in the very beginning of this video. He says, hey everyone, here's my statement. I want nothing more than all of us to be able to put the situation behind us and focus on the future. So I appreciate your understanding in advance that I won't be engaging in dialogue here about the situation. I don't take the slightest bit of pleasure in any of this, and just want us in GameXplain to move forward separately, but amicably. Thanks everyone. I've been hesitant to speak up because the Good Vibes Gaming brand means so much to me, and I don't want us as individuals or our channel to be mired in internet drama, but Steve and Derrick have already, rightly, commented on the situation as it pertains to them, and I recognize that things have reached a point that I would be remiss if I didn't speak up as well. First off though, I would like to remind everyone that the new GameXplain crew of Trish, Joey, and Chris, not to mention my dear friend Tom, who remains with the channel, have nothing to do with any of this, and they deserve the same love and attention you have all graciously shown us over the years. We are categorically not asking anyone to boycott GameXplain, or pull support from their Patreon, and it is our genuine hope that the channel continues to flourish with its new crew. Also, I strongly ask that you do not harass or otherwise send André abusive messages. Regardless of my or our grievances with him, Derrick, Steve, and I condemn in the harshest possible terms any and all harassment and abuse directed at André, and we do not want this to be a witch hunt. I didn't want this to blow up at all, let alone the way it has, and I feel sick as I write this because I hate the thought of anyone at GameXplain continuing to suffer over this situation, and I just want all of us to move on. Nonetheless, here we go. Those of you who are longtime GameXplain fans likely noticed that I started becoming less visible on and doing less work for the channel as the years wore on. The reasons for that have been widely speculated, but some folks connected the dots thanks to my occasional statements here and there that GameXplain didn't pay the bills. That's the long and short of it. Pay was low and inconsistent for so long relative to what the channel made. Recall what Derrick and Steve had said about us being able to see metrics while we were there. That I eventually stopped being able to justify all the work, time, and energy I put into the channel, when I was getting so comparatively little compensation in return. There was no set, reliable, consistent rates for freelancers, which, by my own choice, was what my relationship to the channel was considered to be for most of my time there, even though I was a core staff member. Despite my asking for set rates to be established many times, and André made it clear it was on me to invoice him for what I thought my work was worth, and essentially come up with my own rates for him to approve or not. Still though, as poorly and ultimately untenable as this relationship to the channel was as a freelancer, it was a million billion times better based on what I witnessed every day than being one of its full-time employees. And I was happy and relieved to mostly be able to maintain my own distance from GameXplain in that respect. Let me be crystal clear about this. GameXplain as you knew it and known it simply wouldn't exist full stop if not for Derrick and John. I will always give André all the credit in the world for creating GameXplain and building it up the way he did. But over the years, Derrick and later John did the absolute lion's share and then some of the actual work in maintaining the channel and putting out daily content. Content that we had little to no creative control over, might I add. Particularly later on, André gave the content orders, and we, mostly they, just carried them out. There was very little room for negotiation or compensation, especially in the latter part of our time there. André maintained a very authoritarian, top-down staff structure with him as the sole decision maker except in very rare circumstances. The utterly mind-boggling number of work hours Derrick and John were expected to put in relative to their pay, especially in John's case, and at the expense of their quality of life was just, I've never seen anything like it, and I hope I never do again. Ultimately, we were all utterly taken for granted and exploited, as Steve would also be when he joined later on, but none more so than Derrick and John. And even thinking about the back-breaking work they put into the channel pretty much every single day for a comparatively microscopic recompense, and basically zero credit fills me with anger I can't describe. Without them, GameXplain would either not exist today or be far, far less successful than it has become. Period. End of story. Accusations that any of us, especially them, were work-averse or suffering from the good problem of too much work are patently false, unfounded, and ill-informed. Now, it has been asked whether or not we requested better pay and or working conditions before we left. Let me reassure you beyond a shadow of any doubt that we did, more than once. I'm reminded in particular of a GameXplain team meeting Derrick, John, and I called for a while I was vacationing with my wife. Team is in quotations because by then, André had begun making it clear that there was now an authoritarian split between him and the rest of us. I remember this meeting so clearly because I still, all of these months and ultimately years later, really cannot believe André pushed back on and refused the arguably humble concessions we were asking for at the time. For context, this was before Steve, whose accounts and grievances I totally back up, might I add, fully joined the team. So the three of us called for a meeting with André to ask that a couple things be formalized going forward. Namely, 1, on-time pay each month dictated by a Google Calendar reminder for André, because, as has been well documented by now, we very frequently had to chase down our pay by repeatedly reminding and almost begging André to just please remember to pay us for work that had already been done. And 2, a travel budget being set aside so it wouldn't incur personal debt flying to and working shows we were expected to cover, such as E3, PAX West, and PAX East. In interest of full disclosure and clarity, the E3 bit doesn't apply to me as I live in Los Angeles. His responses? For the first point, he outright refused to commit to a hard-locked payment date each month, and suggested that it was unfair of us to hold him to such an expectation, as we have always gotten paid as long as we reminded him. So why wasn't that good enough? He said that he would try to do better going forward, and to his credit, for me at least, he eventually mostly did. But it seemed he was almost offended that we would even think to demand such an outrageous, quotes are mine not André's, thing as reliably on-time pay. As to the second point, his response to us is that we are technically independent contractors, and thus not entitled to work-related travel being covered or compensated. So in a word, no, not happening. Now to be fair, he wasn't wrong in a legal sense. None of us signed any sort of employment contract. Thankfully, I would eventually come to realize. Ratifying such terms, and as such, we were not legally entitled to any sort of travel coverage from André or the channel. In a moral sense though, considering how tirelessly we, especially Derrick and John, worked for the channel, and how key we were to its growth and whole brand, yeah. The end of that meeting was the first time I distinctly remember feeling deeply angry and resentful and thinking the writing was on the wall, and that was years before we finally left. As I said, I don't want to make it seem like André never paid for or covered anything. While it was not usually offered outright, he would eventually reimburse me for most of my GameXplain related flights, and all transit, rideshare, on-site food expenses as long as I did 100% of the legal work in invoicing everything, and reminding him to pay me. He also paid for most of the post-show and post-event event dinners and bar tabs, and he never pushed back on any of the invoices I sent him, and almost never tried to lowball me any further than I was already lowballing myself. It's important to me that I highlight those exceptions where they exist, because it wasn't all bad, and I'm not trying to claim it was. I also want to remind folks of the kind of crunch conditions André has been accused of engendering at GameXplain are not entirely his fault, and it was never our intention to imply that during the Good Vibes Gaming discussion this topic came up in. These crunch problems are, in many respects, endemic to game journalism / YouTube, and indeed the game industry at large. André does bear some of the blame in that he rarely, if ever, put our mental and physical well-being above the non-negotiable mandate of getting news updates up immediately and having every single preview and review ready to go live the moment an embargo dropped. But he has no control over the time developers allow for review and preview periods. It was Square Enix's fault Steve had 2 days to fully play and write plus produce a review of Final Fantasy VII Remake before release, not André's. It was Capcom's fault I had 5 or so days to fully play and write plus produce a review of both Mega Man X Legacy Collection 1 and 2 before release, not André's. But neither was there any effort on André's part that I can recall to question or soften the expectation to our content to be ready right at the embargo time, regardless of any extenuating circumstances. In closing, there's one thing I can say with absolute certainty. Had it been tenable, I know without a doubt that all of us at Good Vibes Gaming, and I think, though I won't speak for him, John would absolutely have been happy to stay at GameXplain and reap the benefits of its continuing success together with André as a team. We are incredibly proud of what we helped build on André's excellent foundation, and my first several years at GameXplain, when despite any problems I had with being underpaid, our team dynamic was more collaborative and a bunch of friends covering games together rather than the authoritarian, a boss and his underlings setup that it morphed into later, remained some of the best of my career and really my life. Of course we would have loved to stay under better and fairer circumstances, but at the end of the day, GameXplain fully belongs to André. It's his baby, and he just chose to run things in a way that sharply diverged from our needs and wants for too long. I want to express very clearly though that I was, still am, and will remain absolutely fucking heartbroken over the way things turned out because I think we, together, could have taken the channel to incredibly new heights and reaped the benefits together. In fact, I'm damn near certain we could have, and maybe in an alternate universe we did. But sadly, that just wasn't in the cards for us, and we had to take a chance and move on. And which you now know we did, to Good Vibes Gaming. To those of you who have followed us to Good Vibes Gaming, and supported our new venture in any way, whether you have been from the beginning, or only are now in light of all of this, it can never be said enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for caring about the people behind the content you've loved over the years. And please rest assured that Steve, Derrick, and I are all much happier and healthier at Good Vibes Gaming than ever before, even as we remain hopeful that GameXplain continues to be successful under the stewardship of its new team. Onward and upward. And that is finally it for everything going on with GameXplain. Normally at this time I would ask you to sub to my channel with notifications on, but after reading all this, I think it's best if I just tell you to sub to Good Vibes Gaming instead. I've been a long-time viewer of GameXplain, and my favorite videos have always been from people like Derrick and Ash. And after watching their new channel for a bit, it's pretty much the same thing they've been doing at GameXplain, except obviously under much better work conditions. It doesn't nearly have the amount of support that it should have, and if you guys are interested in gaming at all, I recommend you check it out. Derrick released a very good video analyzing the new trailer of Mario 3D World Bowser's Fury, so I think that's a good video to start with if you want to see if the channel is right for you. Anyways, I'd like to thank my channel members for supporting the channel, in particular Scrubby, who decided to donate $100 a month. That is absolutely insane. Thank you so much, dude. But with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in another video.